On the 28th of May, 2016, at approximately 3 in the afternoon, a 3-year-old child slipped past a series of inadequate barriers at a large municipal zoo in southwestern Ohio and tumbled into the open moat surrounding the gorilla enclosure. He was retrieved alive 10 minutes later. The 440-pound silverback who had attended to him during those 10 minutes was shot dead by zoo personnel using a high-powered rifle. Within 72 hours, the gorilla's name was known to approximately 50 million people who had never previously taken any interest in the affairs of his species. What followed, in the months and years thereafter, is one of the strangest, most morally peculiar episodes in the recent history of internet culture. The gorilla was mourned. The gorilla was mocked. The gorilla was sanctified. The gorilla was eulogized in the most ostentatiously Baroque language imaginable by hundreds of thousands of users who had not, prior to the tragedy, given any consideration to the welfare of zoo animals. And the gorilla, against all reasonable expectation, refused to die a second time. Let us first attend, with appropriate solemnity, to the subject as a living creature. His name was Harambe. He had been born in May of 1999 at a small private zoo in Texas, the son of a captive-bred silverback father and a captive-bred mother. He had been transferred to the larger Cincinnati Zoo in 2014, where he was being prepared in the long, patient manner the primate care professionals are obliged to adopt to become the dominant male of a new troop. His name, in case any viewer was wondering, derives from a Swahili language song popularized in the early 1980 seconds by a Kenyan musician. The word, in its original linguistic context, means to pull together or to work in common. The name had been selected, with a certain pleasant naivete, by a member of the zoo staff during a small naming ceremony in the year of his birth. He was, by all accounts of those who cared for him, a calm and unaggressive specimen, even by the gentle standards of his species. The events of the 28th of May, 2016, are now a matter of extensive public record. A small child, observed by his mother and several other visitors, climbed over a low rail at the perimeter of the enclosure, pushed through a thin hedge, and dropped approximately 15 feet into the water-filled moat below. He was, on impact, conscious but disoriented. The silverback emerged from his shelter, observed the child for some moments, and then, in a sequence that has been frame by frame examined by primate behaviorists ever since, approached, lifted the child, and dragged him through the moat to the bank. What followed over the next several minutes is the subject of considerable interpretive dispute. Some witnesses describe the gorilla's posture as protective. Others describe it as agitated. Some saw an animal investigating an unfamiliar small creature with neutral curiosity. Some saw a powerful adult primate behaving with increasing intensity in proximity to a small human child whose life was in immediate jeopardy. The zoo's senior keepers, after a brief consultation, concluded that the danger to the child was unacceptable. At approximately 3:12 in the afternoon, a member of the zoo's emergency response team discharged a single rifle round. The silverback was killed instantly. The child was retrieved with minor injuries. He was discharged from hospital that evening. In the first 48 hours after the incident, the public reaction was overwhelmingly sympathetic to the gorilla. Social media flooded with expressions of mourning. Online petitions called for the prosecution of the child's parents on grounds of negligence. News programs featured wildlife experts debating, with passionate inconclusiveness, whether the killing had been justified. Candlelight vigils were organized in Cincinnati and in several other American cities. A small but vocal contingent of demonstrators picketed the zoo. In the third and fourth days following the incident, the discourse began to mutate. What had begun as a tragedy began to acquire a layer of irony. The earliest deployments of irony came predictably from the same message boards that had previously incubated nearly every other meme we have examined in this series. On those boards, the gorilla's name began to be invoked with deliberate excess, in mock religious tones, in mock political tones, in mock philosophical tones. By the end of the first week of June 2016, the irony had calcified into a kind of recurring, self-aware liturgy. One performed the meme by composing, in deliberate excess, statements of devotion to the deceased animal. One offered, for example, 2 tickets to heaven on his behalf. One claimed to have lit candles in remembrance, while simultaneously preparing one's coffee. One signed off online messages with the salutation, "Rest in peace," followed by the gorilla's full institutional name, which, in formal style, was often given with mock dignity. The joke, dear viewer, was not entirely a joke, nor was it entirely earnest. It was, like much of the comedic material we have surveyed, a layered construction. On the surface, it was a parody of disproportionate public grief over a single celebrity animal death in a world full of larger tragedies. Beneath the surface it was, I would argue, a sincere small expression of mourning, dressed in the protective armor of irony to make the sincerity bearable. By July of 2016, the joke had crossed several institutional boundaries. It had appeared in television comedy sketches. It had been referenced, with some delicacy, by presidential candidates on the campaign trail. It had been performed by undergraduate students as a kind of test phrase, a phrase whose deployment in any given social context served as a signal of one's familiarity with the precise comedic register of the period. One did not refer to the gorilla. One referred, by means of the gorilla, to a particular calibration of the contemporary cultural sense of humor. In the autumn of 2016, the gorilla's name was nominated, in the manner of internet jokes that briefly escaped their proper containment, as a write-in candidate for the American presidency. He received, by the most generous estimates, somewhere between 10 and 15,000 votes. Local election officials in multiple jurisdictions were obliged to publish formal statements, declining to count these ballots. A short-lived political action committee, registered under his name, attracted a small quantity of donations before being dissolved by its embarrassed organizers. More darkly, the gorilla's image was, in certain limited corners, briefly co-opted by groups with overtly racist intentions, who attempted, as such groups habitually attempt, to leverage the broad cultural resonance of the meme for the express purpose of attaching racist subtext to it. These efforts were, on balance, unsuccessful. The meme had escaped, but it had not been captured by any single ideological faction. By the end of 2017, most observers of internet culture had assumed the meme would fade. It did not. In each subsequent year, on the anniversary of the gorilla's death, a fresh wave of mock elegies and ironic devotions has appeared, with diminished but never fully extinguished intensity. In 2021, a major American sports stadium briefly displayed his image on its scoreboard during a moment of silence, honoring an unrelated deceased local figure. An apparent error that nonetheless became a small celebrated incident in its own right. In 2024, a coffee table format hardcover book of essays examining the cultural phenomenon was quietly published by a respected academic press. In 2025, the zoo at which the original incident occurred opened a small memorial plaque, sited at a respectful distance from the new gorilla enclosure, inscribed with the gorilla's full institutional name and a brief biographical sentence. The plaque has reportedly become, to the bemusement of zoo staff, an object of small but steady pilgrimage. So what, in the end, has the gorilla come to mean? I would propose, tentatively, the following. The meme was not, despite appearances, primarily about the gorilla. It was about the precise emotional contortion required of a generation that came of age in a media environment which obliges the same audience to mourn a celebrity, then a war, then a financial collapse, then a celebrity, then a natural disaster, then a celebrity, in dizzying alternation, without any settled rhetorical frame for distinguishing the magnitude of one tragedy from another. The gorilla, by virtue of his absurd ascent from local incident to international object of mourning, permitted the entire generation to perform that contortion, publicly. Under the protective gauze of irony, one mourned the gorilla, in part, because the gorilla could bear it. He had no living relatives reading the comments. He had no estate to feel insulted. He had no political affiliation. He was perhaps the last neutral object of communal grief available in an environment that had run out of them. He died. He kept dying. He has, in some private corner of the network, never quite been allowed to stop. One feels, on balance, that he would have preferred otherwise.